April 25th, 1917. Over Arras at 7:12 a.m., Albert Ball leans into his shoulder harness, one hand on the stick, the other reaching past the windscreen to the top wing. The drum on his Lewis gun is empty. He unlocks a spring catch, drags the gun down on its curved rail, swaps a 97-round pan in 10 seconds that feel like 50, shoves the gun back into line, and fires upward into the blind underside of a German two-seater. The lower wing shreds. Ball drops away, already changing drums again. One man, one gun, one idea. Shoot where the enemy can't see you. That idea will spread. That gun will make it possible. By noon, 3 pilots in his squadron have tried the same maneuver. 2 succeed. One jams a magazine and lives only because the clouds take him in. A single sentence foreshadows the rest. The weapon the infantry called suspect became the pilot's favorite tool. The numbers are stark. A 47-round pan on the ground, a 97-round pan in the air, 500 to 600 rounds per minute from a gas-operated action, 26 to 28 pounds depending on configuration, light enough to move, heavy enough to trust. A barrel wrapped in a distinctive cooling shroud on the ground, often pared down in aircraft to save weight and drag. Not a belt, not water-cooled, not a Vickers. A different solution to a different problem. How to put a lot of lead exactly where a pilot needs it, right now. By May, the Royal Flying Corps has standardized a smart workaround. Don't try to synchronize a gun that fires from an open bolt through a spinning propeller, mounted above the arc, on the top wing, where it can't shoot the prop to pieces. A carved quadrant of metal, called the Foster mounting, slides the weapon down to the pilot for fresh drums and jams, then back up to fire. It looks ungainly. It works. And it opens a new angle of attack. Oblique fire upward into the vulnerable belly of an opponent. The mount is invented by a non-commissioned tinkerer in a squadron line. It is widely copied. It becomes a doctrine, then a legend. The map zooms out. London, 1915. The War Office is drowning in requests. For rifles, for shells, for heavy machine guns. The default answer is Vickers, belt-fed, water-cooled, proven, because static warfare loves reliability, even if it weighs more than a man. But the front is already changing. Patrols need firepower, a pair of hands can carry. Aircraft need guns that don't need hoses and water jackets. And in the middle of this shift sits an American exile, Colonel Isaac Newton Lewis, who couldn't convince his own army to take his gun. He takes his designs to Belgium, then to Birmingham Small Arms, BSA. Production matures. By war's end, BSA alone will have turned out roughly 145,000 Lewis guns, with thousands more from Savage in the United States. The skepticism at home will feel distant, even petty, measured against the flood. The infantry at first is not convinced. The trenches hate mud more than they hate the enemy. The Lewis uses a top-mounted pan with open edges. Muck can ride in on the wind and stop a company advance cold. Troops compare it unfavorably to the Vickers, which, bolted on a platform with a condensing can, will happily chew belts through the worst weather on Earth. But men are not sandbags. When platoons need to move, when raids need to sprint, when a trench needs a portable wall of fire for 30 meters, the Lewis appears. It is good enough often enough, and so common that its silhouette becomes part of the war's visual grammar. On the ground, it is a compromise weapon, flawed by the environment as much as by its mechanics. In the air, where there is no mud, only cold air, oil, and the hiss of slipstream, everything changes. The aerial problem is simple to define and lethal to solve. How do you mount a gun on a moving airframe, stabilize it in gusts and turns, feed it reliably, and let a pilot use it while he is flying? Early in the war, interrupter gear is new and unreliable. Synchronized guns that fire through the prop arc occasionally shoot the very engine that keeps a pilot alive. The Lewis, because it fires from an open bolt, can't be synchronized like a Vickers. But that limitation becomes a strength in a different role. Put it above the propeller, give it a drum magazine, and make it move to the pilot. A Foster rail on a Newport 11 or 16 lets a man change a pan without standing up. On the later SE-5A, the rail is longer and stouter, the geometry more awkward, but the idea the same. In both cases, the Lewis enables something new. Attacks from low 6 o'clock, where the enemy can't look, where his gun arcs don't reach. Albert Ball uses the upward shot to carve his place in the scorebooks. Others imitate him. Not all succeed. It requires judgment, timing, and a stomach for closing speeds measured in heartbeats. From micro scene to macro data, by mid-1917, British single-seat fighters commonly carry two guns, a synchronized Vickers in the fuselage and a Lewis gun over the wing. The pairing isn't sentimental, it's an optimization problem. The Vickers, with belts and water jacket in ground form, is aeronautically clean when fully buried and synchronized, ideal for straight-ahead fire. The Lewis, lighter and fed by a quick-change drum, is ideal for opportunistic angles and for shooting past the propeller arc. You see it on SE-5s, you see it on British-flown Newports, you see it on pushers, swiveling for wide arcs, and you see it wherever improvisation beats convention. The tactic forms: drive under reconnaissance machine or a bomber, slide into the blind cone, yank the rail, and fire vertically. The hit rate is higher than head-on jousts. The risk is lower than tail chasing into a gunner's field of fire. The function defines the form. A flashback reframes the story. June 7, 1912, College Park, Maryland. A gunner in a Wright pusher aircraft squeezes a trigger. It's the first time a machine gun has been fired from an airplane. The weapon is a Lewis prototype. The shot is as much demonstration as declaration. Aircraft are not just for looking, they are for fighting. Years later, the same gun, improved, lightened, mass-produced, will be the weapon a pilot trusts when the sky collapses into seconds. The idea precedes the adoption. The gun precedes the doctrine. The world catches up. Cause and effect begins to stack. The open bolt action that makes synchronization hard also keeps the chamber cool between bursts, reducing cook-offs in thin air. The pan magazine that lets mud in on the ground becomes perfect aloft. Short, compact, easy to stow, immune to belt windage. The light barrel that would overheat in a prolonged trench fight runs cold at 3,000 meters. Slipstream across metal fins is a form of free cooling. The very traits criticized on land become advantages in the sky. An unreliable trench gun, they said. An indispensable aircraft gun, the pilots replied. Consider the mechanics. A Lewis gun cycles by gas tapped from the barrel. That gas drives a piston that rotates a cam, indexing the pan and working the bolt. Ground crews curse the pawls, the springs, the fragile feel of stamped parts when grit gets in. Air crews learn a different ritual. Lightly oiled drums, taped seams to prevent slipstream from lifting the lids, a strict count of rounds fired per burst to avoid overheating, a reflex for the half-second needed to slide the gun down and back up. In ground warfare, stoppages end lives. In air warfare, stoppages end aircraft. Pilots who live long with a Lewis learn to treat it like another control surface. Prepare, anticipate, act. The weapon responds. By late 1916, the English language adopts a new phrase for what pilots are doing: stalking. It is not a duel of equals. It is not a fair fight. Fighters climb below a two-seater and, unseen, tilt a gun upward at 45 degrees to rake a belly full of fabric and wood. The arc bypasses observer arcs and minimizes risk. The tactic blooms wherever Foster rails appear, and they appear widely. The mount, conceived originally to make changing drums easier, becomes the key that unlocks a third dimension of fire. The upshot is brutal arithmetic: more first-shot kills, fewer prolonged turning fights, more missions completed. The Lewis gun, the supposed source of stoppages, has become the key to reliability, measured not by jam frequency, but by mission outcomes. The ground-to-air contrast keeps sharpening. In a trench, a Lewis section is 4 men deep: gunner, assistant, ammunition carriers. Drums are precious, reloading is fussy. Positions are sandbagged, arcs are pre-sighted. In a cockpit, a single person does everything: flying, sighting, loading. The same gun, recontextualized by the medium, is a different species. Aerodynamic drag matters, so the overwing gun sits in struts and fairings that add resistance. Even so, squadrons keep it because the angle it enables is worth the speed it steals. On SE-5s, pilots grumble about the gymnastics of changing a pan at high speed, then do it anyway because the first burst from above is decisive. On Newports, with their sesquiplane wings and tender lower spars, the lighter Lewis is a safety margin. Less mass above the pilot's head, less stress on the center section in turbulent climbs. The pilots adapt, the gun adapts. The war turns into a laboratory where effectiveness outruns purity. Numbers compress this reality. A Vickers installation with synchronization, belts, feed chutes, and fairings is a tidy, efficient system for straight-ahead fire. It almost always weighs more than the Lewis plus its mounting and drum. A Lewis with a 97-round pan puts about 10 seconds of continuous fire in a burst, enough to cut a set of control wires or shred a radiator before the defender reacts. At 500 to 600 rounds per minute, higher in some aircraft-tuned guns, those seconds are the entire battle. A pilot will often carry 3 or 4 pans for the top gun. He expects to use one per fight. He hopes not to need the rest. The math is patient and unforgiving. It rewards the weapon that can deliver assured, immediate fire in the first window. We cut back to the beginning to resolve an open loop. Why was the Lewis labeled unreliable? Partly politics. The U.S. Army's Chief of Ordnance, General William Crozier, rejected Lewis and his gun before the war. The dispute between inventor and institution was sharp enough to become legend. Partly environment. Early British ground use exposed the pan's vulnerabilities in filth. Partly taste. Professional soldiers trusted the Vickers because it had a lineage back to the Maxim. Everything else felt like a risk. But war is a forcing function. When aircraft demand a light, high-rate weapon that can be aimed outside the prop arc, the Lewis fits. And the very institution that dismissed it sees its allies turn it into an air weapon that defines the era. By April 1917, British fighters battle with Vickers, synchronized straight ahead and Lewis above. By 1918, tens of thousands of Lewis guns have been built in Britain alone, and thousands more in America. The balance shifts from rumor to record. Eyewitnesses supply texture. James McCudden writes about learning the upward firing trick and the difficulty of aligning a shot while hauling the gun down. Ground crew diaries mention pilots who insist on fresh springs in the Foster rail, return to snap the gun back forward after every drum swap. Fitters tape the drum seams against the wind and mark drums with chalk numbers to track which ones feed best. On cold mornings, oil viscosity becomes a topic of doctrine. Some squadrons pre-warm drums in hangars before dawn patrols. Each of these small practices removes a variable. Together, they transform an allegedly finicky weapon into a predictable tool. The systemic effects ripple. Reconnaissance units on the German side alter formations to reduce the blind cone beneath their aircraft once intelligence officers realize what's happening. Escort patterns change. Observer training emphasizes downward scanning and quick pivot to shoot back in high arcs. It helps, but not enough. The upward shot continues to harvest. The Lewis gun has given birth to a tactic that reshapes the cost curve of air defense. By mid-war, the visual signature of British fighters is almost standardized: a single Vickers in the fuselage, a single Lewis on the top wing. Later designs will move toward twin synchronized guns, and later still to heavier calibers and cannon. But in this window, the window where technology, tactics, and production capacity intersect, the Lewis rules precisely because it answers at an angle no other gun does, as cheaply and as simply. Air warfare is a geometry problem. The Lewis gives the Allies a new geometry. The irony deepens when you look at procurement. The U.S. Navy buys thousands of Lewis guns for shipboard and landing party use. The Marine Corps embraces it. The U.S. Army hedges and then emphasizes other systems. Yet the Lewis remains ubiquitous in British service. Birmingham Small Arms ramps up production, turning out on the order of 145,000 during the war. Savage in Utica builds more, including runs in 303 for British and Commonwealth use. The flow matters more than the feud. The front cares about what can be delivered, carried, and fired today, not about whose office memo was angriest in 1913. We shift from tactics to systems, the midpoint reveal. The Lewis is not just a gun, it's a logistics architecture. Pan magazines force squadrons to think in shots rather than belts. Each drum is a discrete attack window. That shapes behavior. Pilots visually count down engagement time. Ground crews stage aircraft with preloaded pans within easy reach. Fitters customize racks to keep pans from shaking loose in turbulence. In turn, the Foster mount is not just a rail, it's an ergonomic solution that collapses a pilot's 3 tasks, fly, aim, reload, into a sequence that a human can do under G-load. It is a technology chain: design, mount, method, doctrine. With each link, the uncertainty narrows. The stoppage rate drops, the time to first burst falls, and victories climb. What happened next makes the pattern obvious. As interrupter gear improves, reliable, consistent, trustworthy, Some designers delete the overwing gun and go to twin-synchronized Vickers. But the Foster-mounted Lewis persists on types like the SE-5A because the upward angle still offers kills that no amount of straight-ahead fire can guarantee. Even when the aircraft gets faster and the pilot's workload climbs, squadrons keep the top gun, accepting drag for opportunity. It is the last gasp of an improvisational era, a time when the line between mechanic and inventor is a few nights in a shed. The numbers told a different story than the early complaints. On the ground, a Lewis section might carry a dozen 47-round pans into a fight. In the air, a single 97-round pan could settle a duel in a 5-second solution if placed well. On the ground, cleaning was an hourly task. In the air, the 100-knot wind scrubbed the mechanism and the cold kept it honest. On the ground, belt length and water supply defined endurance. In the air, altitude and luck defined survival. Two worlds, one tool, opposite verdicts, simple Wikipedia +1 climax. The turning insight that reframes earlier scenes. Reliability is not a property of a machine in the abstract. It is an emergent property of a machine in a system. In mud with open pans and stamping heavy parts, the Lewis can be troublesome. In clean, cold air with disciplined maintenance and a mount designed for human factors, the same gun becomes the acme of dependable fire. The claim that it was unreliable was not wrong everywhere. It was wrong there, in the place that would matter most for the future of war, the sky. Before and after. Before the Foster mount, pilots stood in their seats to swap drums. After it, they stayed strapped in and did it in seconds. Before the upward shot, fighters jousted nose to nose or chewed tails and took return fire. After it, they rose under the enemy, invisible and lethal. Before the war, ordnance men shook their heads and passed on the design. After the war, photographs of British scouts with overwing Lewis guns filled newspapers, training manuals, and memory. The thesis in one line: a weapon's reputation is a function of its context. Put the Lewis where it belonged, and it ruled. Resolution picks up the pieces. Post-war, the Lewis keeps working, on patrol boats, on airships, in colonial policing, in the early years of World War II as a stopgap anti-air gun on ships and airfields. But its most decisive chapter stays in 1916-1918 over Flanders and France, where its shape and feed system made new tactics possible. Veterans remember the elastic cords that helped haul the gun back on its rail, the taste of castor oil from rotary engines, the frozen fingers that still worked out the magazine catch. Ground crew veterans remember the chalk marks, good pan, bad pan, and the way a careful oiler could have stoppages. The consequences across time are subtle but real. The upward firing idea resurfaces in World War II as schräge Musik in German night fighters, with cannon angled skyward to strike bombers from below. It is not a direct descendant, but the rhyme is obvious. The Lewis and the Foster mount showed that the third dimension is not just about altitude, it is about firing arcs and blind zones. Aircraft armament designers moved from improvisation to integration, building guns into the airframe instead of bolting them on top. But the spirit persists. Find the angle the enemy can't see. Quotations reveal changed beliefs. A peacetime ordnance report might harp on heat treatment and the fragility of stamped pawls. A wartime pilot's logbook mentions only whether the first burst landed. The test range worries about mean rounds between stoppage. The patrol leader worries about minutes between takeoff and interception. Systems drive standards. Standards drive reputations. Comparative figures settle the case. BSA's wartime output for the Lewis, on the order of 145,000 guns, outpaces what you would expect for a mere stopgap. British squadrons deploy Lewis-equipped fighters in their thousands of sorties. The weapon appears wherever flexibility is needed: home defense against Zeppelins and Gothas, corps reconnaissance escorts, fighter sweeps over the front. It becomes part of an ecosystem: Vickers for sustained, synchronized fire, Lewis for angles and initiative. The scorecard belongs to the combination. We return to the opening image with contrast. The same hand that fought a jam at Arras is now steady, trained by repetition. The same rail that felt like a contraption is now a standard. The same gun that earned suspicion in the mud has become a pilot's insurance policy. Not because the metal changed, but because men around it changed how they used it. Not because it was perfect, but because it was perfect for that problem. The universal takeaway rests in a contrast. Not reliability as an absolute, but reliability as a relationship. Not a weapon judged in isolation, but a weapon judged in the job it must do. The Lewis gun was called Unreliable. Then it ruled the skies on airplanes. One line lands with silence. Context crowned it.